Thank you all for joining us here today for a short discussion on leading in an agile context. I'm Mike, that's Micah. Not to be confused. We like to confuse people with very similar sounding names. And we have been working on leadership for business agility. So business agility is kind of all the rage right now. And what does it mean to lead in a business agility context? What sort of leadership capacities or skills are needed in order to help support business agility and to support agile in general within an organization? And as such, this space for the next 50 minutes or so is really just meant to be a space of exploration. I know sometimes people come to these things and they expect to just kind of sit and listen to us drone on for an hour. We don't want to do that. We will drone, but not for an hour. We'll drone for a few short minutes. But we really want this to be a space where you get to participate, get to be more active, and really kind of open your mind to the concept of leadership. We're going to spend this time exploring what leading means.
So from our perspective, we believe that leadership really depends on context, right? And our context has been changing and is still constantly changing, right? Hence the whole term of business agility, right? We want to be able to adapt and be flexible to the context and to the need. However, from our experience, when we look at organizations and when we look at kind of previous approaches, one way to understand how things may have worked is before there was more maybe of a rigid structure, like organizations were looked at in forms of machines, so to speak, right? It was kind of more of a complex structure. And now we're looking at organizations as organisms, as like living organisms. And hence, since an organization is full of people, right? And people form teams and the teams form certain structures, even though there is a structure and you may think that you can look at it in kind of rigid forms and you can organize it from the outside. At the end of the day, the essence of an organization is always human. It's always people, right? They are organizations that need to adapt and that need to be flexible, right? So one way of looking at it is a metaphor that we like to use, which is the gardener metaphor, right? So if you think about a garden, what do you guys think a garden needs in order to thrive? Water. Okay, it needs water. Thank you. Sun and water.
Weeding.
Time and attention, that's a good one. It needs space.
Pruning also. I seem to be a destructive gardener.
Typically look at a garden, it's always either designed or thought out by the person that's taking care of it. So there's a lot of purpose or there's meaning behind every action that a gardener takes. That's, I think, more important than just the sun, water as well. It's the thoughtfulness that's coming from behind, or the desire of trying to create a very beautiful garden. Because you can also have a garden that you don't keep up with and it just grows wildly. And then you just take a look at it and you're like, oh, look, there's some flowers. And you just keep walking by. So
I would argue that both things happen in gardens, right? Like a human wants to control it, wants to have design it all nice. And then at the same time, you know, a garden just grows, right? Like organically, wildly, however you want to do it, and beautifully as well, right? And it surprises you sometimes with a very beautiful flower that you didn't even think it exists or was part of your plan to have it there, right? In your system.
Maybe a garden is also surrounded by external factors, right? Sometimes you don't know, depending what is next to the garden, something comes flying with the wind, different seeds, so new stuff will grow. So that should also be the external factors that influence the condition of the garden as well, or the potential.
We have a part that we think we can control or design, and then we have the weather, right? Which is very complex and does whatever the weather wants, particularly lately, at least in Barcelona. It's been a bit crazy with these storms and everything that's going on, and no one expected that, right? What does all this have to do with leadership? Where do you see the connection between the gardener metaphor and leadership?
One thing that jumps out for me is the idea that you can plan your garden and have an idea of what you want it to look like. And then it turns out that what you've planted isn't compatible with your setting, the sun you get, the soil you have, the amount of rain in your jurisdiction. So, I think about my mom who insisted there needed to be grass under the trees in our backyard. And for 25 years, my dad would tell her, it's not going to grow. And then he would plant it and it would die. So I think you have to at some point look at what you've got and say, I'd love to have grass here, but clearly that's not going to happen. I need to shift over to another plant.
Leaders of organizations and gardeners or caretakers variable change, which requires the ability to pivot. Yes, thanks, Saurabh. I love your point, Christine, right? Because your dad knew, but your mom insisted for 25 years. Did your mom ever go outside and like yell at the grass and say, "Why aren't you growing? Grow, plant your seeds under the tree. What's wrong with you?"
But I think she just thought by continuing to apply the effort, it would eventually pay off.
And where have we seen that before with leaders and organizations? Get a certain idea in their head. This is what should happen. This is what I want. Try as they might, what they want doesn't happen. And it's never, I very rarely make superlative statements, and this is one of the times that I will. It is never the fault of the people in the organization that doesn't result in what the leader is looking for. It is always a result of the system and the conditions and the environment that the leader create, that the people live within.
And we can look at that from different perspectives, right? We could look at it in terms of like organizational design, how does the garden, the organization has to be designed in order for people to thrive, to be efficient. But for today, we wanted to stick more to leadership. What kind of leadership is needed in this garden, in this living organism? Right? Like, how do we want to interact with the different sections of the garden? How do we want plants to grow or not grow for that sake, and let projects die, let's say, right? Like, what is needed there for this kind of environment? In order to explore that, we thought we'd throw you back into breakout rooms so you're more in an intimate space where you can explore that. What does it mean in terms of leadership? Like if we were to look at an organization as a living organism, such as a garden, right? And then also from your personal experience, what kind of leadership have you seen works in an agile context, right? And what sort of leadership has failed, which is the easy one, right? So I challenge you to also go to like positive examples and what you've seen has worked.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. You must have been having a great conversation because you used the entire 60-second buffer and we had to yank you back here. So in those great conversations, what's new for you? Just listening to others and talking with your peers, what's new for you about leadership and what works and what doesn't?
We talked a lot about things that work well, are leaders who listen first versus trying to jump in and solve problems right away. And, when you have new leaders entering an organization, oftentimes they have a very strong perspective of what's worked before. I did this at X company and I got great results, and they come in and see a similar problem and say, "Oh, I got this. I'm going to solve this problem right away." And a one-size-fits-all approach rarely will actually fit all. And so it's important to, before you dive in, to take that time to listen in order to be agile in the right way.
So when I was chatting with Christine, I mentioned that there was a phrase that you said that, let's not blame the results on the people, but the results should be blamed on the system. The one thing that I've always thought of is that the system's made up of the people as well, the interactions and the processes that they follow. So there's a degree of accountability to the people that are actually a part of the system that the results haven't been delivered. It's more about understanding what are you going to make them accountable on. It's not the whole thing, but there is a part that they play. So a good leader would try to increase accountability both on themselves and the people that are part of the system when they're working towards a goal or a solution.
I would augment that to say, and be willing to make the necessary changes within the environment in order to enable and support those accountabilities.
Yeah, and that's the accountability on the leader, right? Like the leader needs to do something if nothing's getting solved there. Yeah,
absolutely. Like there's a great saying that I love that's like, any result of a system is the exact result that the system was designed to create in the first place. So if you're looking for a different result, you need to look to the design of the system affect that result.
I was also having a very interesting discussion with Rani, and we were thinking about the metaphor of the garden and gardener. And we were also thinking, she actually brought this idea that leadership should also be situational. For example, the weather can change if the storm comes, if it rains. So the leader needs to make decisions. The gardener needs to make decisions at that moment in that situation. So maybe that's also part of the meaning of being an agile leader.
It sounds like there's a lot of discussions around like what a leader should do and what a good leader does. Did you have one of the 3 questions there was, what sort of leadership has failed?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about biased leadership. people who come are leaders who come in with a certain perspective founded in like an unconscious bias or in some sort of just an idea of the ways of working or the ways people should work. Oftentimes, international teams, when you're working cross-functionally, cross cultures, there are a lot of different things and different ways of working that can be taken very differently depending on the context. And so it's important, again, to listen and make sure that you're acquainting yourself as a leader with the people on the team and taking the time to ensure that everyone, appreciates the skills and value that each other brings.
Yeah, those unconscious biases can really bite us in the behind sometimes.
So the one thing that I brought up with Christine was the thing that I've seen fail in almost every organization I've gone into that decided to bring in business agility or do a transformation of some sort, and I put those in quotes, obviously, is the fact that they don't actually understand the influence of change management practices or understanding, looking at the whole picture. It's not just your area of influence directly that needs to be taken a look at. It's also the peripheral departments or teams are going to be working with you. And if you don't understand how they get impacted by a decision that you're going to be making or a practice that you're going to be implementing, then it's going to be doomed to fail because you're increasing the level of resistance or the amount of resistance that you're going to have to overcome. And a lot more challenges because the communication's not clear and blah, 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 the why's not clear and all that stuff. So change management typically is what I've seen that lacks in experience from a lot of leaders, that allows for anything that they're trying to move forward or bring in new to fail, especially in the first attempt. And you'll have a lot of these like treadmill starts where they'll start it and then they'll stop and like, okay, let's try something else, and they'll start it and then they'll stop again, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, maybe also to go back to the gardener metaphor, it would be focusing on one section or only on one species, let's say, right? Which would be an equivalent to managing people instead of actually zooming out and understanding what the environment needs, right? What kind of context do I need to create? What will help people? What will encourage people? Obviously it is about people, but this kind of leadership needs us to step out and have a more systemic view and connect to the environment, and from there try to move instead of just one person or one team or whatever, right?
I used to have a leader who I thought that she felt this role. It's because she didn't walk the talk. So she didn't really support us when we have questions, when we're struggling. She would sometimes write nice long emails of how great the team is. And that was very demotivating.
Explain that to me. So she would write emails explaining how good the team is, but those emails were demotivating? How so?
Because she just shows in those emails how much she cares about the team and how great the team is. But actually, when we are really struggling and reach out to her for help, she almost never replied or supported. So the team felt like she didn't walk the talk. And then the trust was gradually lost.
So she's out there saying all these things, but on the ground, the actual interaction, the actual help and support, people that she was leading were like, she's full of caca.
So the question, as always, is what does it take, right? What kind of leadership do we need? How do we help people step into their leadership capacity? How do we support leaders to, don't really like to say it, but become better leaders, right? I don't really believe in good or bad, but to be the leader that the system needs, that the environment needs, right? And since we are talking about more agile context, I guess there are a few things that they can have in common. So Mike and me, we came up with a list of things that we think could help, right? And they're probably not going to be new to you, but the problem always is, how do we implement this, right? How do we actually make sure that the theory, the books that we have all read, right? How do we actually apply them, and how do we create the proximity to leaders? But I also always stress to the teams, right? Because I don't actually believe that leadership depends on a role, right? Like leadership can be a capacity that can be exercised from anywhere in the system. And one way of doing it, and you probably heard of it, is to have a look at the growth mindset, right? And kind of foster that as much as we can in people and in teams.
To build growth mindset in yourself as a leader as well. So you're trying to cultivate it in your team, but you're also trying to cultivate it in yourself. I
think it's a bit of a misunderstood concept sometimes, because it's not something that you achieve. It's not like, oh, I've got the growth mindset now and like I'm done. It's really constant hard work, and it's not easy. right? So, but it's just a constant reminder of, if we create an environment where that's possible, where we allow ourselves to step into the growth mindset, relationships were going to be easier, and hopefully we'll get a lot more creativity, innovation, and constructive kind of feedback and constructive conflicts also, right? Another thing that we believe helps when it comes to leadership in general is storytelling and influencing. It kind of goes a bit with what, I don't know how to call you, Mickey or Yishkin, I don't know what you prefer today, but goes a bit like walking the talk, right? Influenced by being who you want others to be, and also telling stories and making whatever your story authentic and experiences authentic, and also the not so nice experiences, right? Not just the happy chappy flowery great success stories, right?
I feel like the skill and the art of storytelling is reflect position within the org chart, right? You can be a leader anywhere within the organization. So if you're looking to build out your own internal leadership capacity, your ability to motivate, to inspire, Yishin said, like, to tell the why, to be able to convey this in a way that can be heard and received, let alone have an influential impact on your audience, cannot be understated. And it's not about like, I'm going to tell them a story because I want them to do what I want them to do, right? It's not that kind of storytelling. It's about weaving your words in a way that achieves the overall business goal that you're trying to achieve. Wow, that was repetitive. It's about, I'm not going to bother trying to rephrase that. You know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, like this concept of storytelling, I think a lot of people don't really put a lot of thought around it. And it is a central core part of leadership competency.
Also, like, just to add on that, other things that we think help is to understand that, or at least how we look at leadership, is that it has like almost like three stances, if you want. There's one that is personal leadership. So this is all about defining out what your strengths are, what your values are, what your purpose is, right? Because in the end of the day, leadership is a person, right? But then from there, we step into the relationship, right? So it's highly important to understand social EQ also, right? To understand how you relate, how others relate among each other, right? To have a bit more understanding then. And from what I've seen, organizations don't spend a lot of time there, right? They spend maybe time on a 360 and values and purpose and God knows of assessments, and they have like a little bit of an insight of when it comes to personal leadership, but I'm not quite sure in how far companies really invest in relational leadership, right? And as we established before, it's all about human beings and human relationships, right? And the last but not least would be the systemic awareness, and we've touched upon it right from the beginning, right? With the Gardner metaphor, with organizations as being adaptive systems and all the rest of it. We kind of want to talk about a little bit about the structure. I don't know, you're going to take that, Mike, like about the formal and informal networks, right? And how organizations are designed and how we function, right? Or how we believe they are designed and how they believe they function and what they actually do in reality, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, like everybody's familiar with the familiar tree on the left. The CEO is at the top and everybody reports to somebody somewhere, all going down to individual contributors at the leaf nodes. That's what we call the formal organization. It's something you can look at. It's something you can kind of put your proverbial fingers on. It's something you can map out, right? It defines the structure of the organization. On the left, though, is what we call, it is a representation, there's many, of what we call the informal network. And the informal network exists in your organization, whether you want to believe in it or not. Like it's there and it's working and it's doing something and it's having influence across your organization. There are certain tools you can use in order to try and map what the informal network kind of looks like, or what the influences are of the informal network. But when we come to like leadership of systems and understanding and having systemic awareness, this is what we're talking about, is having the capacity to recognize, everybody can recognize the tree, the formal network, but to also recognize the informal network. And then how do you leverage the two across each other intentionally, as opposed to just kind of letting stuff happen organically? And so that goes back to the influence and the relational part. It's how do you work on your relational leadership in order to take advantage of the informal network in order to achieve achieve the results that you're looking for. The example that I love to use is person down here on the org chart, their kid plays on the same soccer team as the senior VP or the CFO, and their kid plays on the same soccer team. So guess what? Every Saturday, this person and the CFO happen to be sitting on the sidelines of the soccer pitch every Saturday. What kind of influence does that have? What potential influence could it have?
Yeah, another good example are usually like doorkeepers, receptionists, the person who brings the mail, that kind of thing. They all form part of the informal network, and those are the people who actually influence the system a lot more than maybe someone who has the title, right, of whatever, manager, director, or whatever, right?
An example of leveraging the formal network, I'm sure you've heard, if you really want to get in good with like the C-suite or whatever, make friends with their admins. Now, I saw everybody just nodded there, right? You got to make friends with their admins if you actually want to have a hope in hell of getting on their calendar and having a chat with the actual executive.
If you are a person who works in a company with like a printing room or some kind of document service, and you're somebody who's going to need last minute help or late night kind of support, you better hope that they don't have your face on a dartboard down there, that kind of thing. Right? Those are the systemic realities, the social network.
When we talk about leadership capacity, these are the things that Micah and I kind of talk about. So there is the personal, relational, and systemic, and then the integration of all three of those things together. And so here you can see, leadership as a person. So leading yourself first, leadership in relationship, that's the kind of like the social EQ, but also leading within the systems. There is the social network, the informal network, but also about systemic awareness and systems thinking. And integrating all three of those together is the act of broadening your leadership range.
Which is a little bit the message to the world when it comes to Mike and me. Like, this is kind of like what drives us, right? Like, we want to help ourselves and others, I include myself here as well, to constantly learn and to broaden our leadership capacity. Don't play small just because you don't have the role or the title or whatever, and really step into what you said, Saurabh, like the accountability, right? To actually make choices, have a voice, influence your system, influence your relationships.
Actually, I have a question. So you guys are talking about like informal networks or social networks that some companies are also calling it. And what I wanted to know was, what tools are you guys using? I'm actually in the middle of creating a tool for myself, but I haven't found one that works to do a mapping of the social network analysis. So one that I'm satisfied with, I should say. There are several out there, but are there any tools that you guys are using right now to do those mappings?
Yeah, I particularly like CDE diagrams, containers, differences, and exchanges. Are you familiar with those? I particularly like CDEs. We also do relational diagrams. There's an exercise that we take you through that show the connections between certain entities, people and departments, teams, whatnot, and the strength or not of those relationships and the impact that has. Those are the two main things that I'd like to use.
And is there any what I meant by tools, like any online tools that you guys are using that you guys like, this node application actually really helps visually represent what we're seeing here? Is there a tool that you guys are actually would recommend? Or it's kind of like you guys are just building it out yourself?
Not online tool, Micah?
No. Okay, cool. So there might be a market for this.
There you go, Saurabh. Let us know when you finish building it out.
Sounds good, man.
I just know it's very complex because depending on the size of the company and also with data protection or the rest of it, it's a complex one, right?
Yep.
So the way we look at it and what we do in our courses is people who want to explore, you do that from your own perspective, on your own system or on your own team, and see what kind of insights you get that then can help you to alter the approach that you have in terms of leadership, if that makes sense. Rather than collecting loads of data, I'm pretty sure that's out there in the market, but I would assume it'd be very difficult. I remember years ago it was presented to me, but I wouldn't be able to remember the tool because I remember there was the difficulty of data and data protection.
Yeah, most of the tools out there right now require you to integrate with the HRIS of a company, and that's the one thing that holds back a lot of coaches from actually understanding what the system actually looks like in terms of what the actual interactions are, because there's so much of that privacy data. The thing that I'm trying to create is something that's outside, where the team themselves can go in and create something just so that they can use and understand with their immediate ecosystem of what the informal network might look like. It doesn't have anything to do with privacy, because there are some Canadian laws that I can leverage. So
I think it also depends on the context, whether this is like a virtual environment. Lots of companies now work remote, whereas before, it was a typical like having a coffee, God knows where, or like, the coffee center, what Chris said. So yeah, I think it depends on the context.
To answer your question, I hate to sound like a used car salesman. Like, in all honesty, like, come to our LEA course. That's exactly what we talk about in our Leadership for Business Agility course, right? What are the different aspects of leadership? How do you broaden your leadership range, and how do you then use those aspects to build your own competency to become a more effective leader within an agile context in order to support business agility? That is exactly what we do, what we talk about.
Not only talk about it, we actually work through it, right? Because this program is actually 7 weeks. It's similar to what we did today. It's a lot of self-reflection, exploration, learning from others, that small teaching elements, but it's more about helping each other out and exploring and learning from one another in terms of leadership and actual real cases and how to implement it, right? And that's why we designed it for 7 weeks with quite a lot of homework and a little bit of self-assessment at the beginning, because as we mentioned before, we cover the 3 stances of personal leadership, relational, and systemic. And we talk about how to create a transformation in the company, like what kind of leadership do we need there? And it's very pragmatic. Last minute sales pitch, but we'll be running these sessions every few weeks. I believe we actually have another one coming up in 2 weeks. I'm not 100% sure, but fairly soon. Do follow us on LinkedIn, on Leadership Space. So you'll see the events popping up. They're completely free. You can just join us, and then and we always love to learn. So I personally learn a lot by just listening to you. So hopefully it's mutual, and we also welcome all sorts of feedback that you can leave in the chat or on LinkedIn, however you want. And with that being said, we have 2 minutes left. And Mike, do you want to explore any other thoughts?
The only thing I'll say is that Micah and I will hang on after the top of the hour. So if you do have any extra thoughts or questions or anything, please feel free to hang around. But we want to honor your time. We want to respect your time. We promised you it would be 1 hour short. So it is 58. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your contribution to the conversation. I thought it was a really cool conversation. Like Micah, I hope you got something out of it. And we would love to see you in one of our courses sometime. It is in 2 weeks, Micah. I did a quick check. It is in 2 weeks. And the topic is more on org design than leadership. I believe we're talking org design next time. So if you're interested, follow us on LinkedIn and come to our next free session.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for
Thanks so much.
educating me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.